Before I begin, I feel it is necessary to point out that the news arm of the BBC has yet to retract, apologize, or otherwise address the deeply transphobic reporting it has engaged in the last few months. In a pinned comment down below, you'll find my original video on the topic, several videos from the YouTuber Sean, who has been ongoing in his pursuit of trying to get the BBC to own up to what they have done, and also a video from Laura Kate Dale showing the protests that have taken place outside of the BBC offices. While I don't feel any of the people behind Doctor Who are in any way responsible for this, I cannot in good conscience talk about a BBC-owned property without mentioning this first, until such time as it is properly redressed. Thank you. Well, everybody likes a good race. Take Two Doctor Who Reviews continues, rewatching Series 11, and we reach the Ghost Monument. Now, first, an acknowledgement of my first viewing of this. I remember very much at the time liking this significantly better than The Woman Who Fell to Earth. Not because it was an amazing blew me away episode, but it had a vibe and a sense and an energy that was much more what I wanted, or at least what was appealing to me about this new era of Doctor Who. The Woman Who Fell to Earth, even on my initial viewing, didn't really excite me. This got me a little bit more excited for how things would feel and look going forward. The scale, the scope, some of the fine details that are in this, I quite enjoyed. And rewatching it now, that's still largely true. There are a few things that I look back on now as someone who knows some of the stuff that happens later and goes, okay, yeah, so that's not great and that's going to become a recurring issue. But also, interestingly, whereas I said in the last one, there were some instances of things that I knew were going to be recurring problems for me, and I'm like, oh boy, here's the first time right off the bat. Here, that kind of happens, but in some cases in a way that okay, this is going to become a thing that is a recurring issue later, but kind of works. Here, it was strange. There's one key main example of that being the case, and I'll bring that up when I get to it, but can we just start off? I really do love this title sequence. I love the weird, ethereal, blobby, alien nature of it. And I think most of the best Doctor Who openings have a sense of otherness, of strangeness, of alienness to it. I mean, that's part of what was appealing about the very first time anybody ever saw Doctor Who. That sound, that music, those credits, they're weird. And I feel like this is the first time in the modern era that the credits have been properly weird again. And I like it. And I like the bass-heavy version of the theme. I like these titles. So this is the first time they appear, they get a shout out. And then pretty much right after the titles, we then hit my first main annoyance, which is that the cast just get randomly picked up by sheer luck and coincidence, which I think, I never got over it on initial viewing. I think I let it not bog me down too much because it's the first thing that happens, and okay, we had to get him out of that situation somehow, but I think it should have been a little bit of a red flag that after literally just dropping them into the middle of empty space at the end of the previous episode, the way that the characters get out of it is out of just an insanely improbable thing happening by sheer luck. And to sort of paraphrase Douglas Adams, space is big. Space is massively and comprehensively huge. And the odds of being randomly picked up by a passing ship when you're out in the vacuum of space is astronomical. Now, granted, that also happens in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but it happens because there is a ship in use at the time that the entire way that ship works is to make the most improbable things that can ever possibly happen. So, it's literally a plot point that there's no freaking way this should have happened. But then it does because that's what this friggin' thing runs on. This has no such excuse. They just randomly get picked up. Oh, okay. Everything's fine now. It's weird, and I get the narrative need to have sort of each half of the team get picked up by a different ship in terms of introducing each of these racers and whatnot. But like the idea that one of them spotted two and the other spotted the other two, but didn't see the others, like that just doesn't compute. And then we also then have coincidence on top of coincidence, because the ship that the Doctor and Yaz are on just so happens to crash right where the other ones are. Now, granted, like, they were kind of headed to the same place, but I didn't get the impression they had enough control over that ship to really control where they were crashing. And to be that spot on again, like, it's nowhere near the coincidence of the fact that they got picked up in space, but it's just another instance, back to back. Don't love that. There was something that I thought of at the front end that actually does get covered. Remembering the characterization of the dude who's involved in the race, I remember thinking, okay, but is he the kind of person who actually would have stopped and picked them up? Because I don't think he is. But that does get addressed, because both he and the other racer thought that they were bonuses, which we just get through implication were a part of the race up to this point. But the guy who's running the race, I'll come back to him because I like him a lot. He's like, no, there's no bonuses at this point in the race. I had nothing to do with that. But it is just a single quick, just speed exposition bit that feels like an actual part of a conversation that explains why this dude stopped and picked them up if he saw them. So they covered that at least. So talking about this guy who's effectively the villain, the guy who's running the race, I love this guy. What I love about him and his performance especially is just the casual callousness of him.
They were hanging in the starfield when we exited Hyper. You're saying we scooped them for nothing?
Yes.
He knows what he's here for. He is running this race. He just doesn't care about all this stuff that the participants and now these four strangers, as far as he's concerned, are complaining about. It's like, that's not my problem. And that goes right through to the end. I love the way that it ends. When at the very end, these two racers, they come in together, they demand they get joint first place. He resists, and then he's like, fine. Like, that's a little weird because it seems like he gives in because they threaten him, but like, can't he just leave them abandoned on the planet? But whatever, he agrees to it, and then they're like,
get us off this rock.
Fine.
And then?
No.
Like that, I love that no. He's just like, no. And they're gone. I love that. I love that casual, just badness. The dude's just callous. He's just a callous guy. He doesn't care. And he's not evil in a mwahaha sense. He's just a completely uncaring human being. And that makes him a problem. And it's a problem they don't get to solve or defeat because that's not what they're here to do. They're just trying to get back to their TARDIS. So I love this guy. I love his vibe and I love the performance. I also kind of love that Ryan asks if they're eligible to participate, which again, he's immediately like, no, like not even up for debate. So the other racers are decently done. They're pretty well portrayed. The characterization in the exposition is a mixed bag. There are some parts that work, some parts that are clunky. So for example, I can't remember their names. I'm always bad at names. I'm sorry. But the woman racer, she, starts to talk about how bad her home planet is. And then, like, when she realizes she started to open up to Yaz, which is kind of a thing that Yaz tends to do, is to get people to start to talk to her, which makes sense given what we saw with her in the very first episode, and that right now her policing is dealing with, like, small local disputes, and that's largely where you just talk people down and get them to talk to you. So it makes sense. And then the instant she realizes she started opening up, she's just like,
I don't know you.
Like that, honestly, a well-handled bit of exposition. The amount of information she gave and the circumstances under which she gave them and the way she delivered those lines, I bought as somebody sort of losing their guardedness a little bit and then suddenly realizing and snapping out of it. But then we've got the guy and things like the story about his mother and her lesson on how you can't trust anybody, and that feels a little bit more awkwardly inserted in there. Like, I buy it as a bit of explanation of the guy, except that, like, I don't think that aspect of his personality really needed much explanation. Like, as viewers, we've seen reality shows. We've seen the competitor who just does not care about the other people involved and is only out for himself and doesn't trust anybody. Like, we know that as a person, as an archetype. He is that. We don't need this thing inserted in. It's not the worst sort of insertion of character exposition, but it's also kind of unnecessary, and it is a little awkward. So coming back to what I said earlier about having our first instance of something that is kind of gonna be an issue later and be done worse then, but actually kind of works here, is what I've seen some YouTubers refer to as the "hey, how are you feeling" scene. Because the characters' emotions are often not particularly well explored in the moment, and so they have to kind of pause the show for the characters to, like, check in on each other so that the audience knows how they're feeling. This is kind of our first instance with that with Graham and Ryan while they're taking a look at the engine on the boat. But while I think it is going to be a clunky thing later on, or at least to my memory, here, I think it feels pretty decent. Like, they have a moment alone that is it's a moment that felt organic and made sense for them to be in the same space together and be as alone as they're going to be under the circumstances, and to just take a minute, because this has been legitimately just a roller coaster for them. They were in space, they were on ships, they were on this planet, they've been traipsing through the desert. Like, this is kind of the first even close to a breather moment they've had, so it actually kind of makes sense for me that Graham is like, "Hey, how you doing? Are you okay?" And invoking Grace in particular also made it feel correct, because, like, they're both still in mourning. So it makes sense to me that he would, at the first reasonable opportunity, check in with Ryan. This feels like it is that. Certain bits of it are a little clunky towards the end, because there's some very on-the-nose dialogue of Ryan going, "You talk about this stuff too much," and then Graham responding, "You don't talk about it enough." And while that particular ending of the conversation is a little bit on the nose, it's delivered well enough by the performers that, like, it's okay. And I think, honestly, in this instance, it's a pretty decent moment. There's other little things that, within the confines of this episode, work as characterizing moments. Again, we'll sort of keep an eye out to see whether these are built on or brought up again. But Ryan is sort of the first one to really legitimately question, can we actually trust the doctor given the situation she's now put us in? Can she actually get us off this planet? Like, somebody should be questioning that. And under circumstances, makes sense to me that it's him. And then later on, there's this little moment from Yaz when Ryan's like, "Hey, we're on an alien planet." And Yaz just has this smile when she responds to that, which that is a good little characterizing moment and feels like it says a bit about her. Like, she kind of wanted an escape, to run away from her situation. You get a little hint of that here, and we'll find out more about her later that it absolutely fits. I do like in general that the doctor is the only one questioning, these ruins and the circumstances of this planet, being like, this is weird and wrong and something bad happened here. Like, it makes sense that nobody else is questioning it. But also, she's the kind of person who would be like, no, let's not gloss over this. As far as the threats that are on the planet, that's a little bit of a mixed bag. So, and a lot of this has to do with execution. So there's the sniper bots. So first of all, if you're going to call something sniper, I'm going to assume it's supposed to be a crack shot, and they're not very good shots. Now, first thing I'll say is, as far as instances of something that should be just gunning down the heroes easily but is missing, this is one of the better executions of that, just because of the way it's shot, the way the camera moves, the angles that are chosen, the fact that there's some emphasis on the character's serpentining. That makes it work a heck of a lot better than the stuff with, like, Dan running away from the Suntarans, which was what? So while that is another thing that will be a little bit of a and then, like, it's not just here. That's been an issue with Doctor Who for a while, but this kind of shows where good filmmaking, good shot choice, good cinematography makes it work better. So there's that. Here's the thing. Them not hitting their shots, I feel like has a very reasonable explanation that could have just been dropped in as a line. All you have to do is say, these things are really old and probably haven't been activated in ages. And then they're not as good as shots as they should be. I'd buy that. Because otherwise, these are created by scientists who are trying to build ultimate weapons for a warlike race, and they're this bad at their shots. Just drop in one line. It's an easy thing to cover, but they didn't. I want to take a moment to talk about Ryan's dyspraxia because it's getting a little inconsistent here. So because it does get re-emphasis on the 2 occasions in this when he has to contend with ladders. And that is actually a repeat of a specific thing that got brought up in the last episode, like he does not like trying to deal with ladders. Those are difficult for him. So that's good. But the moment that feels off is when he grabs a gun and then runs out to take down the sniper bots and is hit and he's one-shotting them. Like one-shot, dead aim. Now, to be fair, I don't know a ton about dyspraxia. It is distinctly possible that dyspraxia in general, or maybe certain types of dyspraxia and the way they affect coordination, would not impact his ability to take aim and fire with this weapon, but would impact things like ladders. That's distinctly possible. But even if that is the case, I feel like when you describe something that I don't think a ton of people know much about, and it gets described in the previous episode as a coordination disorder, showing a character doing something that coordinated without in some way addressing why this doesn't throw him off, but the ladders do, that it makes the moment weird. And again, maybe it doesn't need to be given the specifics of his dyspraxia, but it feels off for anyone who does not know specifics about that condition, which I don't, and I don't think most viewers do. So, and it may just flat out be a mistake. It may be that his dyspraxia should have thrown that off. But even if it isn't, it feels like a mistake because it's not laying out what is or isn't affected. And it feels like they're just bringing it up at certain times and ignoring it in others. Even if that isn't the case, it's what it feels like. Coming back to some of the threats. So, weird thing, while there's some specifics about it that I'll get to in a little bit, the general idea of the cloths that are fly and wrap around heads and only come out at night, I actually kind of like it. And the reason I kind of like it is that I feel like it reflects a non-human creativity. It feels like an idea that would have come about from a society that isn't Earth-based, with a completely different history, a completely different culture, and a completely different way of thinking about how to lay traps and attack people and make weapons. And I like just the inherent implication that this is the product of people from a culture that just thinks differently. So to us, that, why would you make a weapon like that? To somebody, it made sense. And that, to me, just kind of has implications about the strangeness of other cultures and aliens out there. This is just how they think. And it's different. It's different from us. I like that. Intended or not, I like that. That being said, these cloths are also the mechanism used to give us our first indication of the timeless child. We're a ways off from dealing with that properly, but okay, I'm not going to get into my feelings about the timeless child, which aren't positive, but what I will say here, knowing what we know now, why do these things know? They try and cover it by saying they read her mind sort of thing, she has a whole line, get out of my head, whatever, and they're also oh, she doesn't know, implying that there's something hidden in her brain. Except that the implications we get later is that there aren't hidden memories. They're just gone. They were wiped. It's why she had to be put into the Matrix and shown them, because she couldn't just unlock her own memories. They aren't there anymore. So what the heck were these things seeing? Now that's a retroactive continuity issue, but it makes an already sort of clunky injection of what is going to become a long-term mystery box that it was already kind of clunky and weird and injected strangely. And on top of that, looking at it now, it doesn't really make sense. Circling back to the sniper bots and specifically how the Doctor and the others get out of it. The Doctor, so far as I could tell, and like I even had captions on it to see if I was missing something, just randomly finds an EMP on the ground. Now, we were already dealing with a lot of preposterous coincidences in this, and like I guess I could like headcanon it's some sort of emergency shutoff if something went wrong with the sniper bots. I don't know. They don't cover it with any kind of line on that, but my bigger issue is that she does that and then says a whole thing about brains over bullets.
Brains beat bullets.
How is randomly finding on the floor the thing that just so happens to be exactly what you need to get out of the situation, how is that being clever? Now, again, there's ways to deal with this. If she had made the EMP device out of scraps that were sitting around, that, while also a little bit contrived, would have felt more like a reflection of her approach and her desire to outthink the situation. But like, you just happen to find this. How is that brains? And how does that emphasize your point that you're outthinking bullets? Because it doesn't make the point you seem to think that it's making. And also, to come back to it, her whole moment of guns, never use them. Like, there's no problem with the Doctor taking that position. I'd say the Doctor kind of should take that position, generally. Hasn't always. The Doctor has picked up guns a few times, even going back to the classic era. But the way that it's delivered, like, she just kind of says it like it's an absolute. And I get that it's an absolute for her.
No, guns, never use them.
But again, it feels like that sort of moral superiority that I brought up last time. And last time that was in regards to Carl kicking Simsaw off the crane. But this time, while it is more consistent with the Doctor's like usual standard sort of sense of morals, she just seems to be evoking the sense of, I never use guns and I'm the moral authority here. And it just comes off weird to me. And it's not necessarily wrong. You can have the Doctor be on a moral high horse and have that be part of the personality, but it doesn't really feel so much like a deliberate character choice, so much as the show seems to just be assuming her moral rightness by default. And given that this is a whole new Doctor with possibly a new set of morals, I don't think the show should just be banking on that concept that she's right by default and can get away with not giving some explanation or justification. Now, and as I said, the justification that she gives retroactively, we outthink it, doesn't track with what actually just happened. The other thing about the weapons and the dangers on here is they get tied to the stanza, which in hindsight is very strange, because the stanza get built up here on the back of the previous episode, and that really never goes anywhere. Like, Simsaw comes back later on, we know that, but it's one dude. What is the point of building up the general concept of the stanza as a species or as a culture when we only ever see this one guy? He's never in command of more of them. We never go to their planet. We never really deal with this civilization. We just are dealing with the one guy. So it's weird that this episode bigs up like the whole of the stanza when we're never really going to address more than just the one dude. Now, I know it feels like I've been complaining a lot, and I kind of have. This is another instance of some things are problems now that I know what does or doesn't pay off or come back up later. But I know I still said overall I do actually like this better than the previous episode, and that just largely has to do with the energy and the vibe of it. This just feels better to me as an episode, as a tone, as an energy, and as a just, here's the situation, let's go. And that's the vibe I kind of wanted, and it's not quite there in The Woman Who Fell to Earth, so this was, for me, a very reassuring episode at the time. And as much as I've complained about the specifics, I do still like the episode overall as a vibe. A vibe's a hard thing to defend, but it's one of those cases where, okay, like, there's a lot of problems, bits here and there, but it still feels right. And there are also little bits here and there that work. For instance, at one point the doctor gets asked, I forget by who, but gets asked, "Are you sure about this?" And the doctor just goes, "No, come on." And like that's the spirit and the attitude I like in most doctors. So I was happy to see that here. And later on when they get in the TARDIS, still don't love this TARDIS interior. I've talked about that elsewhere. I don't love the design, but it is what we've got. But when they're inside, because she had thought she'd failed them before the TARDIS actually properly showed up. And they get inside, and I think it was Yaz pointed out,
Thought you didn't believe yourself for a second back there. Who, me? No. Never doubted.
and at the time it felt more like a joke, but in hindsight, knowing that it's going to be a recurring issue of how little she actually opens up to them, how little of herself she actually shares with them, that actually is a decent bit of a foretelling moment. She was vulnerable for a little bit there and then denies that it happened. Given that that's going to be a recurring thing, whether you feel that's an issue or not, that one does feel like a characterization choice. They're planting it early and with a decent bit of dialogue that works in and of itself. So that's decently done. And that's kind of where I'm at overall. I like this episode. I think the performances work pretty much across the board. The energy is good. It, again, looks gorgeous. It's wonderfully shot. And it just has the feel and the tone and the rollicking adventure energy that I was excited for this new series. And I got it here. Despite some of the specifics not quite lining up or being slightly off or being indications of stuff that's going to go wrong later, I do still like this episode. And I could see myself rewatching this one just for fun, which I'm not sure I would do for The Woman Who Fell to Earth. So even now, as much as I rambled on about issues with it, I still consider this a step up. And it still feels like a good indicator of what this era could be. Whether or not it's what it actually turned out to be, well, we'll see how the rewatch keeps going. But for right now, The Ghost Monument. What'd you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon's how I'm able to pay the bills, keep this whole operation up and running. Like, share, subscribe. Also help me out. But don't feel too much pressure about that. I mean, there's other ways to give me a little boost, other things I do, Twitch, I've got books you can buy, merch, etc., etc. Check that out as well, but don't worry too much about it. What I really want you to remember is that you're beautiful, you're valid, and you're loved. You're the council. I just run the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. It's the end credits. Means I gotta shout out some patrons. This month, it is Turok, Oliver B., Linda Walters, TT, Robin Powell, Frenobulax, The Poodle, Eidolon, Tracy Scrabbit, Dharma, Michael Doyle, Vincent Paul Bartolucci, Angry Casperl, Adam Lefty Taylor, Robin Moore, Shayla Gourlay, and Bookworm. Thanks so much for your support.